would now like to try to answer with a few elements to the question of why we are here. Why are we here today, so numerous? Why is there such interest in this topic? And I often do it, maybe too often. I also did it yesterday in Louvain, give you tons of figures and charts, explanations. But I thought it was not the real point today, and it wouldn't be useful. And I think that in the more than 50 detailed contributions that will be presented, discussed over the next 2 days, there will be enough figures and details. This is why I decided this morning to focus my speech on a few circles. This is one circle, and we'll see other circles. I wanted to talk about love and about poetry. And I will start with the first poet from the south, Senegal, Baba Dioum. He wrote this, in reality, we only protect what we like. We will only like what we understand. We will only understand what has been taught to us. This is why the importance with respect to our preservation, protection of our only house, this planet on which we all live. And that's why teaching and research is important around systems that enable us to live at the surface of this planet. Another image of Earth taken 20,000 years ago, and I'm only a climatologist. Let me take a few examples about climate, which I know better. But of course, the question of sustainable development is not only about that, and I will talk about climate changes afterwards. That's very clear. This circle of the Earth 20,000 years ago, look at it closer. There are 3 kilometers of ice on North America and Europe, 3 kilometers in thickness, so much ice that the levels of oceans is 120 meters lower than today. And today the circle is like this. We only have ice left on Greenland. The difference between these two situations 20,000 years ago and now, it's only 4 or 5 degrees in global temperature, not more. But now we're talking about a potential temperature increase of 1 to 6 degrees by the end of the century. And whereas, as the graph showed, it took us 3,000 years to gain 4 degrees. And over the last 10,000 years, the temperature was stable at plus or minus 1 degree. So we are moving towards a world, if we don't take more ambitious measures, we are moving towards, in terms of GHG gases, emissions, a world that will be different as between the first planet I showed you and the second one. But more broadly, the boundaries that against we are currently fighting are more and more numerous than the mere question of climate change. And I would like to start from this article that was a buzz 4 years ago and published in Nature regarding the planetary boundaries. And these boundaries are related to 9 fields which are listed here. And you see the fields where we are in red, those where we are still in the green area, which is still acceptable, and those where we are getting closer to the boundaries that should not be exceeded. And I have highlighted in red boundaries that are already exceeded. First of all, the loss of biodiversity, the excess of nitrogen diffusion into the environment, of course the climate changes. We have already exceeded, according to this article, thresholds that we should not have exceeded. So it's time to react. In orange, because we're close to the limit, the problem which is at the heart of Prince Albert of Monaco's concerns, it's acidification of oceans, which is also due to the addition of CO2 to the oceans, which makes waters more acid and more difficult to live in for the living organisms. Overexploitation of Earth, the stratospheric ozone layer decrease, which is protecting us from ultraviolet rays, the overall global use of fresh water, drinking water, concentration of particles, there's a question mark with respect to that, because there's this perception that it's a very important topic, but researchers have not been able, and often it's an issue which is a local issue or regional issue, have not been able to put a limit at the global scale. But it's and finally, chemical pollution with the same difficulty of placing thresholds at a global scale, and that's very difficult. These are the 9 boundaries that have been identified in the field of environment, but we must add other dimensions. We must add to these global boundaries comments regarding injustice between people in the distribution of some impacts. For instance, allow me to take another example in the field of climate change and health. The map illustrated here was prepared by cartographers that have expanded the surface of the countries according to the importance of the impact. And you see how much the developing countries, especially Africa and Asia, are concerned by the impacts of climate change in the field of health. Whereas contrarily, when we look at we draw the same map and modify this projection, this cartogram by putting the surface of country in proportion to their GHG emissions, we have a totally different picture. So there's also a great injustice in what is happening at the surface of our planet Earth. We could continue the list for a long time. These are old figures, but there are figures from the beginning of the 20 years 2000. What is key is that the wealthier proportion of the planet is using a disproportionate fraction of resources, whereas the poorest people only use a small part and want to have a higher well-being. To summarize with a drawing which comes from the Center for Science and Environment of Sunita Narain, who will be talking in a few minutes. I think that the drawing speaks for itself. It's the perception for many southern populations and northern populations who are not privileged that they are paying the price for pollution, whereas in the international meetings or others, we're talking about what we should do, but we don't act enough. To give another illustration, it's another circle. I promised you to talk about a lot of circles, and I will come next to my second and last point. This circle shows how much a world divided between the north, which is using a lot of resources, and the south, which is using less resources, is not sustainable. And to use another circle, the building of the atomic scientist, which is deciding at how much time we are before midnight, and which has done so in the field of international nuclear war risks, has drawn the attention and moved its needle to the right, on the basis of the emergency of the environmental and sustainable development issues. I would like to conclude with my second point. I told you I was going to talk about poetry. I already quoted Baba Dioum. I would like to quote Jules Boccarne, who spoke yesterday during this conference at Louvain, and who wrote an unpublished text. I won't be as good as him, but I will read his text, and you can see live on the video streaming site. Women and men here present, you are all members of the crew of the Earth spatial vessel. It's only up to you and up to us, and it depends on everyone that the planet Earth is going better, that the water is purer, that the air is cleaner, to make so that the human plant can continue to flourish and embellish in this 21st century, which is just beginning. It is time to get down to work, says Jules Boccarne. If all radios and all televisions in the world would like to do so, with all the satellites that are around the Earth and transmit images and voices, the Earth could become, in less than 9 months, earthly paradise. The question is, how can we reach this earthly paradise? What is the pathway? Because the multiple crises, environmental, social, economic, is present and can be seen by everyone. The earthly paradise, everyone understands what it means, but the question is, how can we move from one to the other? How can we organize this transition fair and clean, if possible, between the two states which we are talking about? How can we find a balance between the economy, environment, equity, social, economic, environmental challenges? It's the challenge of the sustainable development. And it's my last circle, which I take from Nadine Ouzé, who is co-author of the book that has been published regarding society, movement, and sustainable development. It's a circle that shows how sustainable development is at the heart of concerns that are not always talking to each other enough. Economy, social aspects, and environment. Thank you very much for your attention. Marek Hudon will now explain in a more structured manner than I have done how this Congress has been organized in order to try to supply the most interesting lights to show this field of transition between what we want to try to avoid and where we want to arrive. Thank you very much.